Hi, everyone. I'm Heather McCulloch, founder of Women in the Economy at the Aspen Institute Financial Security Program. Welcome to the fifth episode of the Women in the Economy Dialogues, where we've been talking for almost 8 months now, almost a year, actually, about we've been talking to writers, filmmakers, and issue experts about the challenges that are blocking the economic prosperity of women and their families, and how to really build an economy that works for them. Because we know that if women are thriving, if their families are thriving, then we all benefit. So before we start, I just wanted to say a quick note on terminology. When we say women, we're including all people who self-identify as female. So in our dialogue today, we're going to focus on the many ways that gender-based violence impacts the economic security of women and the prosperity of our national economy. We're going to talk about the role that economic insecurity plays in really fueling gender-based violence and the many ways that that financial control by perpetrators is used to keep victims in abusive relationships. But we're really going to spend most of our time on solutions, how access to cash, to savings opportunities, and entrepreneurship can help survivors to rebuild their lives. The importance of safe spaces and support systems to really help survivors to heal and gain a financial foothold, and the role of storytelling in galvanizing policy and private sector action. So now I'd love my guests to turn on their screens. They're come live. Hi, Sonya, Anna, and Celine. Great. So I'm going to do quick introductions, but please know that my colleagues are putting their bios in the chat. And also at this point, feel free to put your own name in the chat, name, organization, and where you're joining us from. I always hate the fact that we can't see one another on these calls, but we want to know who's in the room. So I'm going to start with you, Celine. Celine is a John Lewis Fulbright Scholar based in Brazzaville, Congo. Céline has been my partner on Women in the Economy since we started. And she's also doing a film focusing on survivors of gender-based violence. Sonya, so good to see you again, and still always an ally in this work. Sonya Passi is founder and CEO of FreeFrom, an organization dedicated to survivor safety and economic freedom. And Sonya and her team are featured in the new documentary, which, as I said, I'm now the biggest fan of, called Survivor Made. It made me cry and it made me smile at the same time. Anna López Van Balen, hi Anna, it's so good to see you, is the Vice President of Futures Without Violence, an organization that's been on the front lines of fighting for gender-based violence in the US and globally for over 4 decades. So we're excited. We are going to be talking about this issue domestically, and then we're also going to be bringing in a global perspective. So as we go, feel free to put any comments in the chat, and do submit questions through the Q&A. I'll be watching for them, and I'll keep reminding you to post them. So let's jump in. Anna, I'm going to start with you. I know it's been such a pleasure to work with Futures Without Violence this past year, and I know you've been working on this issue. Your organization has been working on it for over 40 years. So tell us a little bit about how Futures works to support survivors and to support organizations that are supporting survivors. And if you have time to fit it in or have a moment, I'd like to hear a little bit about how the recent federal policy changes are affecting the support for them. So Anna, over to you.
Well, first of all, Heather, thank you so much for inviting me to join this conversation. I'm really excited to uplift the economic needs of survivors of gender violence today with my panel members. And so with that, for those who don't know Futures Without Violence, we have worked to support survivors and their children since we began almost 40 years ago. Since then, Futures has led the fight to pass and reauthorize two seminal pieces of legislation, the Family Violence Prevention Act in the 80s and the Violence Against Women Act in the 90s, both of which fund today's domestic violence infrastructure in every state. Now, much of our work today enlists professionals across industries to help prevent violence before it starts and helps those who have been harmed to heal. Some examples of how we do that fall under kind of five big areas of work. And so if you give me a moment, I want to just go through that. Improving healthy relationships across the lifespan, where we've trained over 500 healthcare providers on an evidence-based universal education strategy to address IPV. And we now run one of the country's few programs focused on older women and the intersection with gender-based violence and economic well-being. We also work on creating safety and security for all by building the leadership and capacity of local, state, and national organizations to respond to intimate partner violence and child abuse with caution, compassion, and specialized knowledge. One important group of professionals we have trained includes judges, and we have done so with over 13,000 over the last couple of years, and how they respond to domestic violence. We also support men and boys in pursuing healthy relationships and have trained over 1 million mental health responders working with youth, 12,000 coaches, and over 400,000 youth. We activate youth and their leadership through a Courage Museum that we're going to be opening up in a couple years that's going to be designed to inspire visitors to believe in a world in which violence is not inevitable. And lastly, we build women's economic opportunity, and that's the work of my team, where we manage the only national resource center for domestic and sexual violence in the world of work, called Workplaces Respond, which we'll put in the chat. And that National Resource Center works to scale solutions for employers, survivors, advocates, and policymakers on ways to end violence in the world of work. We also support regional collaboratives that are transforming workforce development systems to better meet the employment needs of women of color and survivors. We have pioneered the country's first ever national mapping of state employment protections for women workers. And we're working now on using AI to get it into the hands of every survivor across the US. And we've led the country's first research on economic abuse in teen relationships. All of this also inspires our policy and advocacy work, which we do with sister organizations across the country, which has helped unlock over $1 billion for survivors every year. And we also couple this with research and storytelling. Now, I will say all of our work and that of many organizations supporting survivors of gender-based violence is at risk with the new federal administration and their changing priorities. Significant changes have impacted both the ecosystem that has been built to support survivors and their loved ones, but also many of the individuals who benefit from the programs designed to support them as they seek to leave abusive relationships, find safety from harm doers, and the economic security they need to pursue healing for themselves and their families. And in that ecosystem, it includes funding from the Office of Violence Against Women at the Department of Justice, the Office on Family Violence Prevention and Services at the Department of Health and Human Services, the Center for Disease Control, the Women's Bureau at the Department of Labor, just to name a few that have been slated for elimination or significant reduction or consolidation. While some of the funds were restored in the appropriations bill passed by the Senate this summer, it is uncertain what's going to happen with the final appropriations vote at the end of this month or if appropriated funds are going to be dispersed at all. And so what this all means is that the domestic violence shelter in each of your communities across the country is facing significant challenges in keeping its doors open to serve the 12 million survivors who experience domestic violence each year. And for some survivor groups, they may no longer be able to access services like they used to.
Thank you, Anna. That was sobering, but really appreciate you sharing. And I think that's a good segue to you, Sonya. We met 10 years ago, and I think our connection was the fact that you were really leaning into women's economic security and how to build wealth, build assets. So you founded FreeFrom 10 years ago with the conviction that the primary barrier to safety for women was really that, their economic security. And I just want to get your perspective, like, why did you see economics and economic security as such a key issue for women? And then what are some of the solutions you've been using to address it?
Sure. Hi. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm seeing all my buddies in the chat, so very excited. Okay, so it was a very real personal experience that helped me see the economics of it. And it was twofold. For me personally, I was in an abusive situation. At the time, I was an investment banker with a law degree and savings. And it took me absolutely every single dollar I had, plus losing my job, to get safe. So that was the immediate personal experience. As a child, my aunt, my mother's sister, was a survivor who lost everything as a result and started her own business. And the business is what both stopped the abuse and led to her financial security. And that, if I really think back, that's the origin of Gifted.
Yeah.
But then when I was in law school in the Bay, I started an organization called the Family Violence Appellate Project. It's still very much active in California. And that organization is appealing domestic violence cases on behalf of survivors pro bono. And what I was seeing over and over again, the clients that we were working with, the people whose cases we were taking, these were survivors who had left sometimes like 4 or 5 years ago. But absolutely everybody that we were working with was financially devastated and either living in their car, living on someone's couch. They had often lost custody of their children, in large part because they couldn't afford to put a roof over their heads. But they couldn't afford to put a roof over their heads because of the abuse and the financial abuse they had experienced. And so that was the point at which I started to look around and try to understand, like, what are we doing about the economics of this? This is obviously an economic problem. And really realized that there wasn't a lot. And that as a society, we think of gender-based violence as beginning at a moment of acute crisis and ending shortly thereafter, which is completely wrong. There's a million moments before a moment of acute crisis, and there's often lifetimes after that moment of acute crisis where gender-based violence is still playing an active role and needs to be addressed with solution. So I started FreeFrom almost 10 years ago to really transform our society's approach to this, to think about it as a systemic economic problem that has both economic causes and economic consequences. And we do everything from running a national emergency cash assistance program for survivors. Survivors say their number one need is cash, so we give them cash. We have a savings matching program for survivors where we are matching their savings dollar for dollar until they get to $1,500 in savings and have that sort of safety net. Because again, we're not just talking about a moment of acute crisis. Sometimes we're talking about being a few years out of an abusive situation, but a parking ticket away from being in an unsafe situation again. And so having a financial safety net is so important. We do policy work, both at a state level, at a federal level, and also at a corporate level, working with employers, working with financial institutions. And then this other piece, which is the narrative change, which is to say, how do we get people to play their part to address a systemic problem that nobody wants to even acknowledge exists? Part of the issue is all of our visual and media representations of the problem are gratuitous violence, hopelessness, and tragedy, which makes everyone, myself included, turn away. But and I think the truth is we live in a society that has sort of resigned itself to the fact that gender-based violence is just here and always will be, and there's no way, it's not solvable. That's what I think. We're under the impression that it's not solvable, but it is. And And so Survivor Made, or documentary, thank you for watching it, Heather, is sort of like the first step in demonstrating that you can do storytelling on this issue that is joyful, and that is showing survivors in their power, that is showing how we solve the problem. So that's how we're approaching it.
Thank you. So helpful. Céline, you've been my partner on all things women in the economy since I started it a little over 3 years ago. And now I am so honored and happy to say that you are doing your Fulbright research in Brazzaville, working with the ministry, I understand, of women's promotion and integration. Did I say that right? Yes. So you're working, and I know you're working with partners across Southern and Central Africa to co-design safe spaces where survivors can come and heal and rebuild their financial security. And you're also doing, to Sonya's point about the importance of narrative, you're also working on your own autobiographical film, which I can't wait to see. So tell us a little bit about sort of what are you learning from your research? What are the strategies that you're seeing in Congo and other parts of Africa? And tell us a little bit about your focus on co-designing safe spaces.
Yeah, thanks so much, Heather. Also, I really wanted to thank you, Sonya, for talking about the joy of talking about your experience, and the joy piece is really important because, yeah, I am a survivor of gender-based violence, which is really, since the past 3 years, has motivated all of my work. I don't even like to call it work; it's really just my calling that I feel like has been established. But yeah, so I've been in Congo the past 3 years, and the research is mainly focusing on co-designing, like you said, safe spaces, specifically with survivors aged between 18 to 26. And it's actually survivors who are at university here, because there's such a huge amount of basically schools prostitution rates, forced prostitution. And there's also violence that occurs on campus between professors and students. And it's not even just hurting the survivors or the victims, however you want to define them, but it's also hurting men who are involved, who are either survivors or who may not can't engage with certain students because they'll be penalized in that way from professors. So it's an entire systematic problem on university campus, let alone in the country. And so what we're seeing also in Congo is just the huge amounts of stigma around this issue. And also, I would say, across sub-Saharan Africa. And as a result, when there's that stigma that's so entrenched in society, you're going to create programs with a little bit of that in mind. And so what I mean by that is, for example, my research looks at specifically shelters. So how are we going to create spaces, whether that's physical spaces, virtual safe spaces that allow survivors to heal. A lot of the ways that they've been designed have been without lighting, without exterior spaces. And those little things that you think are no-brainers aren't. And so even the most common words used to describe shelters in sub-Saharan Africa has been prisons. And so that, I think, took a toll on me. And when I was doing research, specifically in Botswana and South Africa, I would actually stay in the shelters just to get a feeling firsthand of, okay, what is it like? And what I also noticed, and I don't know, this is why I'm so happy that you guys are training all of these professionals who are working in these spaces, because there's also just secondary trauma that occurs in the shelters. And a huge thing actually was that the trainers or the shelter assistants don't have people to watch their children. They don't have paid time off. So they are also experiencing these issues, which prevents them from being able to help survivors that are in the spaces themselves. So there's just so many different aspects that need to be further supported, I'd say. So that's, I guess, kind of more largely what we're seeing in the spaces that I've been kind of looking at. And so, yeah, that's kind of a bit of the situation here. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. So I want to just remind everyone, please just be thinking about your questions and throw them into the chat, because we are committed to providing time for you all to jump in. So let me just jump into some questions for all of you, and please just like jump in at any point, and I'd really love all of you to answer these. So as you mentioned, Anna, you talked about the ecosystem, and we know that right now, the ecosystem of support for organizations both in the US and globally is really being threatened by the loss of financial support. So it's both, US public funding, but it's also just, philanthropy not, being spread too thin. And that is really having an impact on women's economic security, both now and going forward. So the question I have for each of you is just in your different spheres, in your walkabout, what are you seeing and how are those funding cutbacks affecting what we're calling the ecosystem?
Well, it's like, where do you begin? Because it's in such a short amount of time, it's been hard to see just how quickly our community has been impacted. And just to give some numbers behind that, it's about $400 billion in cuts, which is about 25% of the infrastructure supporting women's health, safety, and economic mobility. And that includes everything from like tax credits, healthcare, reproductive health services, childcare, housing, and workforce programs, all of which are essential to support women with their economic mobility and security. And so, it's and what this translates into is tens of millions of women who will face heightened economic insecurity. It means survivors of violence, single mothers, low-income women of color, immigrant women who are going to be disproportionately harmed. And what will potentially be just short-term savings right now on federal programs, we know are going to lead to longer-term social costs of worsened poverty, housing instability, preventable maternal and child health crises, and barriers to workforce reentry. One clear example that I think has been in the news this week is related to the staffing cuts at the big federal agencies, many of which were predominantly staffed by women. And so in just about 3 months' time, they're stating that about 300,000 Black women left the workforce. And, and that's significant for a variety of reasons. But we also know that Black women in this country face disproportionately high rates of violence, and both domestic and sexual violence. Um, just to give a couple more examples, the policy changes happening at the Department of Labor are going to undo many actions that have been underway for recent years to get more women into non-traditional jobs and apprenticeship programs. This is critical because we know that an electrician over the course of their lifetime will make $1 million more than a childcare worker or service worker. And so these numbers like just give you just a kind of a brief glimpse as to the economic impacts that these changes, these policy changes are having on women's access to the services that they need to maintain their livelihood, to support their families, and ultimately to really reduce the risk of facing violence and harassment on the job. And so there are many more examples I can give, but these are just a couple to highlight just why this is such a critical moment for our community.
Yeah, yeah. Sonya, I'm going to
I
turn
think
to you.
I'll just add to that. Yeah, Anna laid it out beautifully. What that's looking like in our movement is organizations doing mass layoffs, organizations shuttering. I think it's happening at least once a week that an organization that we've worked with, we find out doesn't exist anymore or is closing its doors. And what that really means is that we're losing, there's obviously the support that survivors are losing that these organizations were providing, but we're also losing survivors from our movement. We're losing expertise. I'm hearing about research projects that were underway that are just halted because that entire team is gone. And that's research that we'll never get back in a field that's already under researched. And you said earlier, Heather, about there's the cuts that are happening, the government cuts, and we have, as a movement, been so heavily reliant on the federal government for so long that it feels almost like we're disproportionately impacted by this administration, because many organizations, 97, 98% of their funding was federal funding. And that's going away what feels like overnight. The private philanthropy really has not invested in ending gender-based violence. And a big piece of it is people don't understand that gender-based violence has been sort of put in this pigeonhole, and people don't understand that it's the root of everything that they're working on. So if you're a health funder and you're not heavily investing in ending gender-based violence, you've got absolutely no chance of improving women's health. It's literally the number one reason women die. If you're an education funder that wants to improve literacy rates or school retention and isn't thinking about gender-based violence, et cetera, et cetera. And so part of the work I think that needs to happen is that we need to educate funders in whatever sector they're in to understand you're a climate funder, you're a democracy funder. You need to be focused and understand how gender-based violence plays into it. I'm going to go off camera for a second because I realize my laptop's about to die. I'll be right back.
Sure. And to that point, Sonya, I know you're still listening. There was research done by Blue Shield, and I remember Debbie Chang, the president of the Blue Shield Foundation of California, sorry, but she brought up that the vast majority of women that are homeless in California today are survivors. And so again, to Sonya's point, if you're not working at that intersection, you're missing a key driver of homelessness. Céline, why don't you jump in at this point while Sonya's off screen, while she's charging?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think the hardest thing for me is just that I think this administration does not realize the impact, or maybe they do, I don't know, but the impact that this has not only domestically but internationally. For example, one specific shelter that I work with in Botswana, it's one of only 3 that exists in Botswana. They lost 31% just like that of their budget because of the loss of USAID. And then recently they've seen a huge uprise in femicide accounts, etc. And so just hearing, news like that is not fun. And so it also makes me think about, okay, how can we come up with new solutions for how to support organizations, but also just prevent from these occurrences from increasing and protect women's lives, quite honestly. And so, yeah, and also more broadly, I think we're seeing across Sub-Saharan Africa that a lot of governments are not funding the research, like Sonya, you're mentioning. That's so important. So we don't even have valid data that can point us to the right solutions and inform how we create our solutions. For example, in Congo, there's not been a national-wide survey on gender-based violence in the past 3 to 4 years. And so that alone has prevented a lot of how we can even create programs that are going to be effective. Yeah, so it's sad. Sad to see these numbers and hear these numbers, but also hear the stories behind these numbers that are happening.
Yeah. So this is all really heavy, as I know you know. I want to just talk a little bit about how this all pertains to our economy. I do want to start with a glimmer of hope. And I mentioned this to all of you before the call, that I thought it was hopeful this morning when I saw Ro Khanna and Congressman Ro Khanna and Congressman Marjorie Taylor Greene beside one another, introducing and talking with the survivors of abuse at the hands of Jeffrey Epstein and company. And one of the things that one of the speakers said, what one of the survivors said was, this isn't this is not an issue of the right. It's not an issue of the left. It's an issue of human dignity. And so there are glimpses of hope of just like, how do we, really reach across the aisle and bring people together on this issue that will have such a deep impact on women and this economic security of families and communities. So what I want to ask you now, let me just start with a quote that I read over the weekend in one of your recent reports, Sonya. So you said, gender-based violence is a systemic economic problem. We are all responsible for it, either perpetuating it or solving for it. So I just want all of us to think about that for a second. And I have two questions, but let's start with the first one. Why is it an economic problem? Like, we've talked about it, but let's just dig into that a little bit more, because I feel like this is critical to getting people to lean into solving it. Sometimes people have to see it as an economic problem to take action. So let's start with you, Sonya.
Sure. I mean, I think I'll share three statistics that kind of sum it up. The first is that survivors say themselves that their number one obstacle to safety is financial insecurity. The CDC did a study a couple of years ago when FreeFrom was first getting going, in which they found that domestic violence costs a female survivor an average of $104,000, which, that's more than most people make in a year. And then 99% of survivors are part of the abuse that they are being subjected to is economic abuse. So first of all, it's just incredibly expensive to be subjected to harm. But then on top of that, the economic abuse looks like not being allowed to work, having your job negatively impacted. Either you lose your job, or you aren't able to get a promotion, or you lose time in the workplace that then impacts your trajectory. Coerced and fraudulent debt is a huge problem. Having credit cards in your name that either you don't know about, or having debt that you are putting in your name under threat of harm, explicit or implicit. Having your money stolen. We know that 58% of survivors have their bank account controlled, monitored, or stolen from. And so what we're really talking about is trying to get to physical safety, long-term physical safety, with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, a destroyed credit score, no savings, no fallback system, because of course we know abuse isolates you, no job very often, no job prospects, depending on how long you've been out of the workplace, physical short-term and long-term disability as a result of the harm you've experienced. And then layer on top of that, I think Anna spoke about this earlier, but layer on top of that, the wealth gap. And then how that wealth gap is made even greater depending on your ethnicity, your race, your immigration status, your sexuality. And so it's impossible. It's impossible for people to break free. Anytime I talk to a Native or Indigenous woman about this issue, they're like, I didn't even think of myself as a survivor. There's not a single woman in my entire community that hasn't experienced this. So I didn't even have a name for it. And that is just how the economics of it have kept women so stuck that it is just what we consider to be life.
Céline and Anna, please feel free to jump in. I have a bunch of things I'd like to say, but I'd like you guys to jump in first.
Go ahead, Céline.
Anna, do you want to? Okay, thanks. Yeah, just to add, I think I was telling Heather this yesterday, maybe, that I feel like I see ads. It's like you can't put a price on healing, like maybe for like heart attack or maybe losing weight, but you don't see that about healing from gender-based violence. And I think maybe I'm speaking from personal experience, I am, but it is way harder because it's not only physical, it's mental. And, the idea of feeling safe is economic, like Sonia's mentioned, like we're all mentioning. And there's a price for that, like for example, if you want a nice, stable housing, you need to have security. There's a price for that. You need to have, maybe protect like different locks on your door. Like there's so many different things that you don't even realize, and it adds up. And so, yeah, and even for example, PTSD has been the most common, challenge amongst survivors that we've been hearing here, and there's just no investment in those resources here. And that's not even mentioned about, okay, how can we find and even invest money into training psychologists, for example, on specifically that issue. So yeah, I think it's just goes back to also the fact that we just need to be talking about this and creating ways to maybe not taint this as a scary issue, but taint it as something that we just need to be discussing. And also that, this might be happening to your mother, it probably did. And we don't want to keep hearing stories about that. And also raising, children to hear from their parents that this is just normal for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anna, I know you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, no, and Céline, I grew up with those stories coming from a family of survivors, and still to this day, they're like the ghosts that live in our family. The only thing I feel like I would add to what both Sonya and Céline have stated is, we have state laws in throughout the country, in all 50 states and US territories, that are not being enacted that could actually help survivors with their employment situations and hence their economic security. We did some research led by, I see my good friend Kate in the chat. Where we talk to states that have had protections in place, like in California for more than 20 years, and states that haven't had those protections, or have had them just for a couple of years, just to see, are employers like using those protections? Are survivors accessing those protections? And when I say protections, it's everything from unemployment insurance that's specific to survivors. It's access to paid leave or unpaid leave, and it's anti-discrimination protections based on your status as a survivor, and as well as being able to access reasonable accommodations, which help you if you are specifically dealing with an abusive situation and need to modify your work situation, your hours, where you're located in a building in order to be protected.
Yeah.
And so we did this research and we found that more often than not, no one knows these policies exist. They don't know how to access them if they do, and they're cumbersome if nothing else. And so I think of all the great policy work that so many of our sister organizations, our organization, Sonya, that we all advocate for. And it's like, what is the point if no one knows about it and can't access it? And these laws are to help survivors with their employment situations. Now, I know sometimes survivors do need to leave those employment situations because they're unsafe. But in the cases that they can, how can we help them and allow them to maintain their economic security while they're figuring out all these other pieces with the support of their employers or their managers or even coworkers? And so I think that's just another added element that often isn't discussed, and it's something we're working on. But gosh, there's so much to do in order to really raise visibility on these issues.
Thank you. So I am now going to really kind of push us on solutions. You just mentioned some great ones in terms of state policy, Anna, and the fact that they need to be enforced. So pretty straightforward there. And I understand with the work that you're doing, you're getting information out through your AI project about what is out there. So I really appreciate that. I see that there was a question that Sonya already took a stab at, but I'm going to bring it up for everyone. And it is helpful because it moves us in the direction of solutions. So I'll just read it. I'm wondering how unions, worker centers, or other worker rights organizations can play a role in ending gender-based violence, especially with changes at DOL and other Fed programs. Who wants to take a stab at that? And Sonya, why don't you? Obviously, because you already answered it. So
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. And I shared in the comments a link to our report that we just did. We surveyed 2,400 survivors about their work experiences and what they needed in the workplace or what they needed in order to keep their job and be safe in their job. And one of the not startling, but very hard to argue with data points that we collected was that survivors on average are using 11 sick days and 12 vacation days each year to deal with being subjected to harm. And of course, if you are dealing with being subjected to harm, you are neither sick nor on vacation. And more often than not, people don't even have that much leave. And that's often why people either stay because they can't deal with the harm because they don't have the time off work, or they lose their job because they have absolutely no choice but to deal with the harm, but don't have the leave at work and so lose their job. And so a really, really low cost, low lift policy change that we've been pushing for at a corporate level or at an employer level is for employers to bear the burden of the cost and create paid and protected leave for survivors. And a lot of big companies have adopted it. Meta, Bumble, Berkshire Bank, Blue Shield, the city of Chicago, Unilever, ASOS. And we want to kind of like normalize this as a type of leave, which is to say you can't, I mean, FreeFrom obviously has it, but we're not one of those big employers. You can take this leave, no questions asked, to deal with the harm, and it doesn't, it's protected, so you're not going to lose your job, and it doesn't cut into your vacation or your sick time. And, you know, I said earlier, and you quoted the report, we're all responsible for the problem because it's systemic. As employers, we are pillars of our society. Like we are responsible, and we have certain responsibilities as a pillar of our society that gets many benefits by being employers. And so for employers to take that burden instead of it falling on each individual survivors, really is much more cost effective, is not expensive. The city of Chicago has told us it has not been expensive to implement this for 60,000 employees, and is something that, to be honest, most employers that we have talked to are not against. They just had never thought of it.
Great. And again, please look at the resource that Sonya put in the chat. You put one in your response, I believe. Oh, actually, it's in the Q&A. Sonya, maybe you could put it.
Oh yeah, I'll move it over.
Sees it. Yeah. Great.
Can I jump in too, just to share another added resource? Some of the work that we do under the Workplaces Respond National Resource Center is really to help employers, unions, advocates, really create the programs and policies for work settings. And so we actively provide free resources on our website, workplacesrespond.org, for anyone who's interested in doing that. And, you know, and when I say anyone, you know, I often get asked, who is my stakeholder group? And I say everyone, because when we're talking about employers, we're talking about Fortune 500 companies, nonprofits, small companies, contractors, faith-based organizations, sports clubs, educational institutions, local and city government. And then we are not even talking about like all the categories of employees that include paid and unpaid interns, contractors, volunteers, board members, consultants, temporary workers. all of which fall under the protection of whatever policies and programs that exist for an employer.
Right.
And I should also say in every location in which they work, which includes public and private spaces, it can include where they take a break, a temporary offsite work location, a person's home who's working remotely, a hotel or restaurant being used on work travel, a conference center, a work-related social gathering, online and virtual work communications. All of that is covered in what we call the world of work.
Yeah.
And we, as part of our mandate at the National Resource Center, work to provide the resources so people can implement this, so unions can advocate on behalf of their members. And so I think we have a resource that we created a great resource. It's like an online course for anyone who's interested in addressing violence and harassment in the world of work that we can provide in the chat. Thank you so much. And that's just one resource that you can find on our website as a means to really creating the policies that help provide the safety and security that we are all charged to do if this includes everyone. We are responsible in creating the workplace cultures that provide the safety and security for our coworkers, for ourselves, and for the survivors in our work settings.
Yeah, so great. So we're getting a lot of great questions coming in. So Céline, you could answer the last one, but I also have a new one for you. So what are some of the most impactful ways private philanthropies can contribute to strengthening the movement against GBV?
Yeah, I was really thinking about that one so much.
I didn't mean to
There's so
put you on
many.
the spot. Sorry.
No, I was like, well,
And
so
anyone can jump in if you're stuck, Céline, on that one.
I guess I feel bad, but I'm going to answer this in a kind of answering it in more of the highlighting the challenge, at least from Sub-Saharan Africa perspective. There's just a huge disconnect that we're finding from local grassroots organizations. I mean, shelters, but also just any type of resource or center that's there, even hospitals from these private philanthropies, even within the continent. So there definitely are African philanthropies that support these initiatives. But and so that gap is really, really difficult to, get access even to a conversation to see, what are the opportunities for further financing. So I think what might help is just exploring ways to fill that gap, or get rid of that gap so that these frontline workers, organizations can be able to have more access to the funds, or even maybe just more access to smaller funds that can provide direct urgent funds in times like these when all of a sudden you lose 31% of your budget. And so that's kind of also what we're trying to explore by working with all of the different grassroots organizations. We're actually doing a survey to see, how much of their budget has been lost, how little M&E do they have to even just, report on their support systems and impact, and also just in general, how much visibility. So do you have a website? Do you have social media? Do you even have a way to get your name out there for people to find you and support you? So yeah, I hope that kind of answers the question.
Yeah, yeah. Did anyone else want to?
Yeah, I mean, I can share. Oh, I'm sorry,
Oh,
Anna.
go ahead, Sonya.
Okay. FreeFrom is fully funded by private philanthropy. We don't have any government funding. And the biggest driver of funding for us is another funder. Like funders listen to funders. And so the most obvious thing I can say as to what private philanthropy can do is to fund this work. And then I think, that's not always possible in the immediate, but funders listen to funders. So gather other funders, gather under other funders to learn and get curious about the intersections of whatever issue area they have and gender-based violence. It is 2025. FreeFrom is almost 10 years old. This is the first year of FreeFrom's life where we have gotten funding under a women's health pillar. And that is because this women's health pillar had 3 sub-pillars, one of which was violence against women.
Mm.
That's like, it should not be revolutionary in 2025, but it is.
Right.
And so there's so much that philanthropy can do to educate itself and each other and create that sort of like momentum. We all know that everybody who's on this call probably witnessed it happening with respect to care work and the care economy. Nobody cared about the care economy, and suddenly everybody cared about the care economy. And funding pillars were created within other issue areas, be it future of work, or be it economy, or be it democracy. We were suddenly funding care economy. And the exact same thing can happen with respect to gender-based violence, and needs to happen with respect to gender-based violence. And the people that are most influential in doing that are philanthropy themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a question. I wanted to just respond to your answer to a question here about, there was our first question that came in. So curious about where that 104,000 cost to the survivor came from. It's so tough to get that data. I just wanted to point out, as I was doing a deep dive to try to figure out, well, what is the aggregate impact of gender-based violence on the US economy? And for anyone out there, if you have that data, please share it. The closest I could come, though, first of all, a lot of links led to nowhere. So that means some of that information is being erased. Why? No idea, because this is not a DEI issue. This is not as we said earlier, it's not a partisan issue. It's about, supporting women to get out of abusive situations and enabling them to thrive. So the closest I could come was a World Bank UN report. I'm forgetting the date, and it was the cost to our overall GDP is 1 to 3% each year. So it's astronomical. And I just wanted to throw that in there in addition to the personal cost of $104,000. Okay, so let's take one more, and then I have one more question for all of you. I'm a mom with 2 tween daughters. This information needs to be presented to high schoolers in California. Yes, and is it being presented anywhere that you all know of? Like, any thoughts on that? No.
Heather, can you repeat the question? I was about to answer someone in the chat.
Oh, okay. I am a mom with 2 tween daughters. This information needs to be presented to high schoolers in California. So just to broaden out the question, like, what are we doing to educate young women, girls about gender-based violence? Is it being taught in the schools anywhere in the US or abroad? Céline, if you have thoughts on it.
Yeah, I can share just a couple things we have done, and I know there are other organizations that have also done it. In our teen economic abuse work, we've created a number of resources that can be found on our website that explain the issue in a teen appropriate way, including with videos, et cetera, that really help to highlight it in the context of dating violence and economic abuse. I know our Courage Museum is doing a lot to educate people as well, our young people in that work as they're kicking off their education programming. But there is information out there. And I know I saw someone in the chat say they were from the National Youth Employment Coalition. We recently presented there on our work, and we know that others are taking up that banner, even if it's not exactly in the context of calling it gender-based violence, but they are talking about healthy relationships. They are talking about ways in which young people should be caring for themselves in every aspect of their lives. And so just a couple things to uplift there.
And one of the things I love about conversations like this is we have so many experts on the call. So I'm seeing a lot of answers to it coming into the chat. And everyone, please do check the Q&A for responses. I am going to now shift us back to a question for all of you. And for those of you who, if you haven't had your questions answered, feel free to reach out to me and I'll make sure you get it answered. And it's heather.mcculloch@aspeninstitute.org. Okay, question for all of you, because I do want to leave us all with hope. And I know, like, looking at all of your work and watching it over time, I know there's a lot of progress being made, and I know there's reasons to be hopeful. So I just am going to go around, and I'm going to start with you, Céline. So what makes you hopeful?
Yeah, I think for me, what makes me hopeful is people being interested, honestly, in joining the movement. So when I talk about my film and my experience, and also the people that we're all working with, so we have 6 organizations across Africa now that have agreed to be a part of Impact Strategy and screen the film once it's done. That brings me joy because it means like this has potential to actually inspire so many other survivors and also inspire so many policymakers to actually invest in this, invest in the healing of so many people that need it. So I would say that's really been keeping me going, especially past the past 6 months. So
Yeah. Thank you. Anna?
I would say that, one thing I love about this work is that I feel like it's a community.
Mhm.
And in everything that we do it in collaboration. We do it working with survivors, not on behalf of survivors, but also with survivors. And I even recently we saw that a number of groups of state domestic violence coalitions around the country came together to really challenge some of the changes that were happening, and they've had some success in uplifting their cause. It's moments like those that give me hope that we just need to keep joining forces, because we're not going to solve anything on our own. This problem is too big. It's global, and it's going to force us to really come together and form unlikely partnerships, to really further the work that we're doing and really elevate the solutions that can make such a difference to the field. And so that gives me hope, and it's something I want to I continue leaning upon on these dark and sometimes really difficult days.
Thanks, Anna. Sonia?
Yeah, I mean, just to echo everything that Celine and Anna have said, there's really nothing more powerful than survivors in community with each other. And so a lot of what FreeFrom is focused on right now as infrastructure, the little infrastructure that we had is completely dwindling, is building our collective power and becoming so unignorable in our size and might. And that gives me a lot of hope every single day.
Well, I'm going to share what gives me hope. And what gives me hope, it gives me the chills, is talking to all of you. I mean, you are all amazing. I saw Rada say that about you, Sonia, in the Q&A. But you give me hope. And then the other thing that gives me hope is watching movies like Survivor Made. And Celine, can't wait to see yours, as I said earlier. But Survivor Made, I'm just going to do a little shout out. You didn't ask me to do this, Sonia, but it is so hopeful. I literally, I mean, as I said to you when we were prepping, I was crying and smiling through my tears because there was just, it was such a blend. It takes you on a journey, but just recognizing the power of community, the power of entrepreneurship, and really helping survivors to thrive was so helpful. And it's such a scalable solution. So, with that, I just want to say thank you so much. I love being in community with all of you, and we will continue. And thank you everyone for joining us. We had a great turnout today. You will be getting a survey, so please fill it out because we're trying to always improve these, and we really appreciate your feedback. And the recording will be up on our Aspen Institute's website on YouTube. So please do share it with your folks. And with that, thank you so much, and we will see you soon. Bye.
Thank you so much, Heather.
Bye. Thank you.
thank you.